talking to Steve Hughes. We're going to be talking about his album very shortly. Steve, thanks for joining me.
No worries, mate.
Now, if we could start off by delving back into the past, tell us about the early days here in Australia and lead us into Slaughter Lord. How did that get going and what was the story there?
All right. Well, this could if we had a couple of days, we could have a great conversation. But so we'll do a quick synopsis. So basically, I live in the Blue Mountains with Mike Burke, who was the guitarist in Slaughter Lord, who also went on to become the guitarist in Mortal Sin for their second album. And we knew each other at school, and then I got into heavy metal, and then I met him, and he had some Black Sabbath records and Priest records and stuff, so we started to hang out, and I played drums and he played guitar. And we met some other guy, Tony. He was the singer in Slaughter Lord. We met these guys from Blacktown at a Def Leppard gig in 1983 or something. So they came up and we started to jam with these guys from Blacktown, who some of them would go on to be in early versions of Slaughter Lord, and some who would then leave or get kicked out, and they would go on to make bands like Addictive and stuff like that. Sandy Vidani was was in the first version of Slaughter Lord, and he left and went on he did the first gig, and he left and did the first Sadistic Execution album. And so then, Slaughter Lord got together around between 83, it begins, but then didn't really manifest until about 85. And then made those demos, did those first shows, only did a few shows, and then, it just blew up, really. And Mick Burke then went on to join Mortal Sin and make Face of Despair. And then when Wayne Campbell got kicked out of Mortal Sin around 88, 89, that's when I played in Mortal Sin for about a year and a half, did the tours overseas, Faith No More and Testament and stuff. And so that's a very early version of me and my underground heavy metal. Sort of by the end of Mortal Sin, I then joined a band called Presto, which was a mixture of Mick from Mortal Sin was in that for a bit. It was a weird mixture of metal with trying to write other music. I was into other music by that time. By the late 80s, I started to drift away from thrash, listen to Police and Kate Bush and just other music and Rush. Got heavily into Rush. And then I played in Nazul. It's a big cross-pollination. I started comedy. I was still in Presto, but then I joined Nazul as well. I made those two albums with Nazul, that extreme black metal band. I made Totem and Under the Sign of Life Living. Black Seed. So there's a quick synopsis of 20 years in bands.
Quickly before we move on, just tell us about the 3-track demo, Taste of Blood. Tell us about that. What are your memories of recording that?
We recorded that in a guy's garage in Smithfield, which is a suburb of Sydney, where I was living at the time in the caravan with Wayne. We met this guy who played bass in a rock band at the studio where we rehearsed, Steve King, who went on to actually play bass in Rose Tattoo for a while, in a later version of Rose Tattoo, probably in the 90s. And he was always just a funny guy. He was older than us, and he was a crazy guy and just a rock and roll maniac. And I think he had the studio, or, we produced by him on it. He had something to do with it. And so, it was just this guy's studio. We could hardly play, really. And we just went out there and recorded 4 songs, but we only put 3 out because one of them didn't turn out very well. I think I played too fast, but it really wasn't in time, and it was a bit of a mess. Yeah, that was just tape trading days. So, I used to go out. This was old school, not before, you could just put everything around the internet. I used to go to my friend's house and get a tape deck that did it in real time, not high speed, and sit there for 5 hours and get 25 tapes and then go home and made the covers myself and photocopied them all and folded them up and put these tapes in them and put them in envelopes and sent them out. That's old school.
Did any of those make their way overseas? Well, they must have made their way overseas, surely.
Oh, all of them. That's what I was writing to. That's why you can still come to Norway or go to Norway and you can find Slaughter Lord shirts, or you can find them in Chicago, because I sat in that caravan when Wayne moved out. I lived by myself. I sat in that caravan and got tapes and made bios and found fanzines all over the world, all over Europe, America, South America, Canada, China, Japan. Just sent demo tapes out. That's why people know it. Yeah, that's why they know it. That's why At the Gates did a cover of it. Because I was probably sending those demo tapes to guys in Norway and that who ended up in bands like Emperor and stuff.
Yeah.
So I would have been sending tapes to Fenriz and guys from At the Gates, but I didn't. They were just kids then, and I didn't know them. They weren't in bands, and I bet that's how they got it, because I probably said it.
Stand-up comedy happened. How did that transition? Were you always a class clown and people were saying you should be a fucking comedian, or how did it come about?
I wasn't the class clown, but I was definitely funny around my mate. I got out of school. I didn't find anything funny about school whatsoever. I don't know. I just always, pretty high energy guy and funny. As my acting mate in London says, he goes, "You're one of those pricks that can just act." He goes, "I'm one of those actors that has to then, get into the role." He goes, "With the idea." He goes, "I know you're one of those pricks that just does it, aren't you?" I went, "Yeah, sort of." I can just kind of, I don't know, I just kind of do that kind of stuff. It was kind of funny. And then I was in the 90s. I was in bands for so long. It was all getting, I was in Presto then. We made 2 albums. Presto was that strange, eclectic sort of rock band. Some people call it indie rock. I never saw it as indie rock. We were more influenced by Peter Gabriel and Brush and U2 and even aspects of heavy metal. I don't hate all. Do I like indie rock? I don't even know. Don't even know what it is, really.
I think half of the people in indie rock don't know what it is either.
During that time I was in Presto, I started to do acting courses, improvisation courses, stuff like that, because I thought, I've been in bands for years, made records, done tours. No one had ever paid me $10. And I didn't make music to make money, but you need to make money because I wanted to be in a band, so I need to have a job, so I want that to be my job. But I've never done bands to make cash, but if I'm going to make it and have it be job, well, I need some cash to do it. So, but you never got paid in Australia, because Australia can't give you anything artistically unless it's mainstream and a happy meal. So I thought, well, I'm going to try stand-up. I'm a funny guy. I can kind of act. So I just started to do some acting courses and then went, okay, well, I'll just start comedy. So then I just started that. I was all right at it, so I just kept going. I was still in bands at the time, so, I remember coming back off tour and going and do a comedy show and realised, Jesus Christ, I haven't done this for months and I've got no jokes. And then I died on my arse. I thought, right, I should really start taking this a bit more seriously. And then I just started getting into it. And then I realised, Nazul started a gig and I put out the second album. But I've been doing comedy a few years then, and I knew that I had to go overseas to get good at it. Like, I'd always wanted to make my bands go overseas, but, you've got to get out of Australia. That's why I sent all those tapes around Australia. And nothing was going to happen in Australia, so that's why you had to make it overseas. So when I got comedy, I didn't have a band who I had to wait on. I just became a comedian and I had an Irish mate there at the time who was moving back to Ireland. I had a British passport. I'd been doing comedy for 3 years. I knew a few comedians from overseas now who'd come out to Australia. So I just went, right, I'll get to quit Nazul and go to England and do comedy because I'm 32 years old and I haven't got any money and I have no income and bands keep exploding. And I'm not going to be able to have a job by being in an extreme black metal band in Sydney in 1999.
So you hopped on the tube of farts and you went overseas.
Straight to the tube of farts, got to London, had a shower, and became poor again. Well, not again. I was already poor. What are you talking about? Did with comedy what I would have done with music. Just go on the road, Plus, I realised, if I was in bands, if my bands had been in Australia or in Europe, they would have done stuff. If Slaughterlord was in Germany in 1986, would have done stuff. Because someone sort of said, I'll put a record out. Okay. Do you want to go and tour with Destruction? Yeah, great. Would have happened. Because things just don't happen in Australia. They don't happen. And there's just no one there. When we grew up in Australia, the population was 14 million, and no one ever came there. It was like being out just out the back of the earth. Nothing happens unless you like sport or scuba diving.
Right. So when did the idea for this album that's just come out? When did the idea for that form, and how did it take shape? Well,
when I moved overseas to start comedy, I didn't really play drums for quite a few years. I just focused on comedy. I met a lot of comedians, a lot of actors. I was just in that world, just gigging. And then when I moved to Manchester about 2003, but I'd already lived in Ireland for a few years, where I lived with the guys from Primordial, that Irish metal band. But they were still quite underground and hadn't got the success they have now. So I lived with those guys for about a year in Dublin. And then in 2003, their drummer couldn't get a month off work to do a tour. Me and asked me could I learn these songs and do a tour for them. I played, I think it was about a month, 6 weeks with Primordial and Rotting Christ and Enthroned around Europe. And I think around that time, I was living with a couple of comedians. I was living with Jim Jeffries and a Canadian guy called Jason John Whitehead, who now writes for Jim. And they moved back to London and I got a flat of my own in Manchester and I bought some practice pads, and I also, by this time, had already bought myself a guitar, because I thought, okay, I can't play drums everywhere, so I'll just fuck around on guitar. And I got all right on guitar. I'm not great on guitar. I can't really play guitar properly like a guitarist. I can just write my own songs and play them. I haven't worked out anyone else's song yet.
Yeah, right.
I can't play a song. I can't play a song on guitar. So I just started mucking around on guitar and playing drums. I had a practice pad in my house. I just kept drumming, and it's fun. I just put songs on and drum along. So I've always drummed, and I just keep up. It's fun for me. I like it. It's music. It's fun. People have a hobby, go BMX riding. I just play drums for 3 hours. So I was always drumming, and I started to write these songs with a friend of mine, the guy who's in the clip. Back in the day, I met him through comedy. He's sort of young fella. He's like 20 years younger than me or something. But he liked metal and that, so we mucked around. He played guitar, so we started to make some demos. I started to write these songs. Because I kind of, I've been in bands for 20-odd years. I kind of knew how to write songs. I've been in lots of different bands, black metal, sort of presto, early thrash. I like life. So I just thought, I like music. I'll write some songs. So I started writing songs, started demoing some songs, stuck some of them on my early comedy CDs and DVDs. I made a silly film clip for one of them back in there, because his album's quite old, but I was going to put it out, but then I decided to have a breakdown for 5 years, which is a whole other show. So, I recorded that record. So once I had these about 6 songs finished, I demoed about 3 or 4 of them. I came to Australia in 2009, or something back then, 2010 or 11. I recorded with Lachlan, keyboard player from Nazul, who's the sound engineer for all the Nazul albums. He's actually a professional sound engineer. He went on to do a lot of albums in Australia. He got nominated for some of his engineering work. I met him through Presto. And then, so I did the record with him. I pulled in a few guitarists that I know who can actually play guitar to do the shredding solos, because they wanted some proper shredding metal solos on there, but I can't do them. So I got some guys in, a guy from Nazul and a friend of mine called Dominic, who was in a band called Unbound with Wayne Campbell from Mortal Sin and Tony Noel from Slaughter Lord for a few years. And I also got the Swedish guy, Johannes Axman from the band Wolf, who just happened to be in Sydney at the time on holidays with his girlfriend or something, and I came to a comedy show and I hung out, and then I said, do you want to come and play a solo on this song? And he went, for sure. So this Swedish guy dropped in and improvised a killer solo on this track. Yeah, basically that's how I put that together. It just happened over a few years. I sat around, in between comedy gigs, noodling around on my guitar, playing along to trance music to get that right hand going, You want to get your right hand tight, put some trance music on with an electronic drum, and then for 15 minutes try to stay in perfect time. Yeah, then basically wrote the songs and recorded them, and there was a bit of a gap before I put it out, obviously, because some unforeseen circumstances arose. A few people have got it, because I've redone the name of the album, I've redone the artwork. So there'll be a few people out there with the old version that they would have got years ago, which was just a black cover, black and white photos of me inside. So there'll be a kind of, it's 2 versions. Not many people had the first one, because it was kind of got thrown around a couple of gigs, and a few, my mate Utopia sold for half a dozen copies.
Sounds like the old tape trading days, mate. Black and white photos and bios inside.
Yeah, exactly. So this one I thought, right, the whole thing's changed. I've been through so much. I'm going to redo the artwork, do the name of the album. It's got a kind of concept to the artwork and stuff, which had to do with what I'd been through. And ironically enough, I think the fact that it's come out now, I think the timing is better. Not a timing of like sales or marketing. Timing. It feels right. And it's just because it's happened, and it's just, okay, well, this is it. This is when it's happened. This is when it's happened. So, and it feels good. I like it.
Yeah, it's a good time for people to hear new music. I've never heard so much new music. I've never had the time to hear so much new music as I have in the last few months. It's crazy.
Yeah, that's a point. Exactly. People actually, sitting around going, okay. So, yeah, basically, and then the film clip that's come out for it, me and my friend just made that recently. I got back to England to do a tour. They did this bullshit lockdown rubbish. We won't go into. That's another 2-day conversation. And then, the guy in the clip is, as I said, the young guy I started making the songs with. He's actually the young guy who I used to demo the tracks with. So he's actually a proper editor. So when I got back to England, I used to live with him. Because of this lockdown, he had to take his whole editing suite back to his house. So we had a whole professional editing suite sitting in his kitchen. So we just said, okay, let's make a film clip. And then we just, it was kind of full circle because he's the young guy I used to go into the studio with and get him to play the guitar parts while I did the drum tracks. And he wrote a couple of the earlier solos, not the shredding ones. He wrote some of the simpler solos on the early tracks. And yeah, we used to jam together and muck around. And so it's kind of cool. He's now sort of full circle. He can play the part of the guitarist and he edited the thing. So that's why it feels right, I guess, the timing. And the fact that Killian, my mate, is even in it, like the guy who I used to go into the studio with when he was 19 and fuck around with him and record all the old demos of some of the tracks. So, yeah, it's kind of a cool thing.
So what happens now? You can't work comedy-wise or music-wise really at the moment, can you?
No, not in a live sense, but I've got this, I'm making another video. We have another video planned for this album. We've done some preliminary work on it, waiting for our cameraman because our cameraman has to go and get a day job now as well, doesn't he, the poor fucker? And then, but I've got the YouTube channel out, so I actually think I'm going to start doing some live-to-camera talking on YouTube.
Yeah, good idea.
I think I might talk about the old Australian metal scene, because Australians they're not very good at documenting their history.
No.
Even my old bands, I have nothing. I have no videotapes. I was in Presto for 5 years. We had all the live tapes. We've lost them all. We've got no photos, no video. We toured with the Angels and Hunters and Collectors. We didn't video any of it. You know, we've got a couple of bits of Slaughterlord. We've got no photos of Mortal Sin overseas playing with Testament and Faith. No one videotaped it. Australians just don't seem to do anything like that, right? And then if it does, it gets lost, and it's just. But if you want to get pictures of headbangers on train stations with slabs of VB on their shoulders, everyone's got thousands, but no one took any photos of the band. We've never had. I mean, look at Slayer, the early thrash thing in San Francisco. There's a book now out. What is it? Blood on the Front Line or something?
Murder in the Front Row.
Yeah, those three photographer guys that took all the photos of the old Exodus, Possessed, Slayer, Metallica, Megadeth gigs in San Francisco, and it's a whole book, hundreds and hundreds of cool colour photos backstage, the same that all bands at that era, metalheads, were doing, big groups of you drinking beer in Venom shirts and spitting beer and holding flying Vs. But us in Australia, we got none of it, because we never had a guy at our gigs going, I'm going to become a photographer. Why? Because in America you go, well, I might become a photographer. Why? Because there might be a job for me. But in Australia it was just purely underground, because it's not going to go nowhere.
Yeah. If you were a Melbourne band, there would have been a lot of video of you, because my mate Lee Wilson over there, he would have fucking filmed every coming through. But you weren't in Melbourne.
Exactly right. I guess you had some guys who did stuff like that. But even now I go, but where is it? Some guy's garage. So I always go, so why doesn't someone go, well, I've got all this stuff, why don't I try and put a book together? But no one does. So there's apparently stuff everywhere, but where is it? Some guy's bedroom. Well, what fucking good is it in there? Oh, he's got a channel. That's cool. I forget we're in the modern world where they can actually pull it out of their bedrooms now and show the world. So,
hey, Steve, all the best with it, mate. Thanks for chatting to me.
No worries.
All the best, and stay safe. Thanks, mate. See you later.
Cheers, bro. No worries. See you, bro.